Hello, this is Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, with Sheldon Richmond, vice president of the foundation. This is the Libertarian Angle, the show that brings you the libertarian perspectives on the burning issues of the day, the perspective that we all know you're not going to get in the mainstream media. What you're going to get there, of course, is the standard statist, interventionist approach, whether it's on domestic issues or foreign issues. But the big issue continues to be, Sheldon, the issue that we talked about last week, and I think we ought to talk about it some more, is this big Syria debate where President Obama and his coterie of people there in the government are over there and starting to lobby congressmen and trying to get votes. And, you know, there's all kinds of trades that are taking place, inducements being offered, you know, federal money for your community and so forth. And it's really funny to see them talking about, that President Obama's credibility is at stake here. America's credibility is at stake. I mean, you hear all these nonsensical arguments that, of course, you didn't hear before he said he wanted to go and start bombing Syria. And we all know that this is really about regime change. I mean, this is what it's been about since the very beginning, and they're just trying to figure out some way to help the rebels, and they go in there and look for some kind of excuse or justification, whether it's, WMDs or chemical weapons or what have you. But it's really funny to see these people scrambling around. Notice that everything else has been put on the side burners here, all the other issues that they're facing, and everybody's focus now is whether the U.S. should bomb Syria or not, start another war again. And it's also fascinating that they're facing, I don't know what the numbers are, but I know the overwhelming number of Americans are saying enough's enough, not another war. And so they're up against that. And so it's going to be pretty interesting to see how this thing turns out. And what's really going to be interesting is that if Congress doesn't vote this authorization, which of course is not part of the Constitution is either a declaration of war or no declaration of war. It doesn't talk about authorization to use force and all these kind of nonsensical terms. But it's going to be interesting is if Congress were to vote it down as to whether Obama would follow through on his threat to bomb Syria on his own initiative. And so the whole thing is turning out to be very interesting, kind of comical. What do you think?
Well, the word that was coming out of the White House late last week was that if they were to get turned down by the Congress, that he would not go ahead and do this. He was realizing that would hurt his own political fortunes or whatever the reason might be. So there were some good vibes coming out on that account. I mean, we can't take that to the bank yet. There was speculation today that if he gets approval in the Senate, before the House gets to act, he might just say, okay, that's good enough, I'm going. But it seems to me that is politically risky for him as well, because he said he was going to submit this to the Congress, and the Congress consists of two houses. So it seems to me there'd be a huge amount of anger among congressional Republicans and Democrats and the American people if he were to go ahead and not let this get through the House. Things are looking pretty bad in the House now, and as you say, they're pulling out all the stops. He'll make an Oval Office address to the country tomorrow night. Behind the scenes, you're right. He's saying to the Democrats, "Hey, this is me. I'm the president. I'm a Democratic president. You gotta be there for me." He's pushing all the possible buttons. Yeah, you're right. Pork barrel is probably part of this. I think I want to say something about this war weariness. You hear many people saying on both sides of the question, the American people are war weary. And I want to challenge that. I think, and other people have said something similar. I can't remember who exactly said this. I'd give a hat tip to this person, but I can't remember who it is. I've been reading so much. But the issue is not war weariness, and I don't think the thing is that people are war weary. Most Americans are not really touched by the wars. We don't have a draft, so most families don't have somebody who's been taken by the military to fight a war. The fiscal impact, of course, is a bit abstract. So I don't think it's war weariness. I think it's war wariness. War weariness, in a way, is a way to diminish the opposition. It's like saying, look, the American people are tired. They didn't get to sleep last night. Don't take too seriously what they're saying right now. They're tired. They need their 8 hours. No, they're not, it's the weariness that's speaking when they say they're against war. That's an insult to the American people. They're not war weary, they're war wary. They're wary about government lies and another extended a session in the Middle East of bombs and perhaps even invasion. And don't forget, the promise in the resolution that the Senate put together is not that there will be no troops on the ground, no combat troops on the ground. There are troops in Iraq that are not called combat troops, and they have suffered casualties. So this is nonsense. We're being lied to, and again, it's not war weariness, it's war wariness.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that many people are finally starting to recognize that foreign interventionism has consequences. And that this notion, like on the 9/11 attacks of, the terrorists have just struck our nation just like the flu, it's just this thing that happens to hit particular nations and it's now come to American shores and woe is us. And of course, as we've been pointing out here at the Future of Freedom Foundation since 9/11 and before 9/11, that foreign interventionism has consequences. And one of those consequences is the potential for terrorist retaliation. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out, that you go in there and you use troops or the CIA to kill people or oust or democratically elected officials, install dictators, support dictators. People get angry over that. And a certain percentage of that anger is then oriented into terrorist attacks, whether it's on, against troops or against targets like on 9/11. And I think people are starting to figure out that we've essentially won the argument there, that it's not about just, hatred for America's freedom and values. It's the direct link between foreign interventionism and the threat of terrorism. So when we look at things like Boston or the Detroit bomber and all these other, terrorist schemes, 9/11, people are sitting here, in my opinion, saying, is this worth it? Is this worth to start another war in order to be living under this specter of, the prospect of another terrorist attack, Boston-like or whatever, along with all the stuff that the government then does to keep us safe, or supposedly to keep us safe. The TSA searches at the airport, which have fundamentally changed air travel in America, made it a miserable experience, and all the other things, the NSA surveillance schemes. So they go and they go abroad and they do these kind of things. It produces the anger and rage of like, what are you doing over here? What business is this of yours? And then a certain percentage of people retaliate. I'd like to think that Americans are weary of this whole crisis environment, it's color codes and all this other stuff that is an inevitable aspect of foreign interventionism.
Yeah, and I think we have to keep the full context in mind. I really think Syria is a big player in all this. I think what's going on here is that this is aimed at ultimately at regime change in Iran in order to protect American and Israeli hegemony in the Middle East. It's also an attempt to give a blow to the Russians so that they don't have any influence in the Middle East. This is all about protecting U.S.-Israeli turf in the Middle East. And Syria being an ally of Iran, it's in their view, it's a nice way to, it's a nice first step on the way to Iran. But let's keep in mind, they talk about what's Iran going to do if we do nothing. Will Iran take this as a meaning they can, as the news commentators like to say, continue their march to nuclear weapons? Let's keep in mind that according to the 12 U.S. Intelligence agencies, Iran decided not to go for a nuclear weapon back in 2003 and is not doing that. The Israeli intelligence force also says the same thing. They're not moving toward a nuclear weapon and have not decided to move toward a nuclear weapon. And what would, if anything, change their mind about wanting to have a nuclear weapon? Another attack on a Middle East state. Because they'll get the message that if you have a nuke, like North Korea, the U.S. won't go for regime change. But if you don't have a nuke, like Syria, like Lebanon, like Iraq, the U.S. will go for regime change. So this idea that we have to intervene to keep Iran from developing a nuclear weapon is total nonsense. It's the precise opposite of the truth. And Kerry, just like Kerry keeps saying, if we don't do something, Assad will threaten us with chemical weapons and give them to terrorists. He leaves out a very important thing. Assad's opponents are Al-Qaeda affiliates. they could just as easily come into possession of the chemical weapons and use them themselves. So this idea that we need to go against Assad in order to safeguard the American people is complete nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, I just love the hypocrisy in all this. Is that, you know, this thing is always been about regime change. They want to get Assad out of there. He's aligned with Russia. They want to put their dictator in. That's what this thing's been all about. Same with Iran, that they've never gotten over the fact that the Iranian people in 1979 ousted their dictator, the CIA's dictator, the Shah of Iran, after the CIA and the U.S. national security state had ousted the democratically elected prime minister of the country, Mohammad Mossadegh. And so they would love to effect regime change in Iran and install their dictator again. And we see this time and again, the partnerships with the dictators. Take Assad. In all of these commentaries that you see about, oh, he's the new Hitler, he's a dangerous man, oh, we've got to draw the line in the sand, we now have to enforce it. Hardly any, well, I don't know if one mainstream media player in this brings up the fact that the CIA, the U.S. national security state, partnered with Assad as part of their torture agreements. I mean, that was where they sent that Canadian citizen, Mahar Arar. They sent him to Syria because they had a partnership with Syria under Assad to torture this guy. And they did torture him for a year. It turned out to be he was innocent. They kept torturing him, trying to make him confess, and turned out he was innocent. But how come they don't present this partnership? If this man's so evil, why is the U.S. national security state partnering with him? How come they don't bring that up? Or the partnership with Saddam Hussein when Saddam Hussein was using chemical weapons. In fact, we've got a page on our website at fff.org. You can Google where did Iraq get its weapons of mass destruction, and we've got all the articles there. They got them from the West. You know, their chemical stuff and everything. They got it all from the West. When Bush went in to invade Iraq, the reason he was so convinced that he was going to find the WMDs is he had the receipts for them. But all this hypocrisy. Well, yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's even worse than that. They helped Saddam Hussein gas Iranians during the Iran War. 100,000 people, Iranians, were killed or injured by chemical weapons, with the U.S. providing satellite and other intelligence in order to facilitate that. They also were fully aware that Saddam Hussein used chemical weapons in Halabja against the Kurds, and this was during the height of the U.S. partnership, under the Reagan administration partnership with Saddam Hussein. You know, they're talking about now, it seems to be half facetious, but Kerry demanding that Assad turn his chemical weapons over, you know, to the UN or over to some independent source as a gesture to show that he won't do it again. But I don't hear them demanding that Egypt and Israel sign the Chemical Weapon Convention. They have not ratified that convention. They are not parties to that convention. And as I wrote in TGIF the other day, last Friday, the U.S. has been willing to turn a blind eye to Assad's and his father's chemical stockpile, basically in return for silence about Israel's nuclear arsenal of 200 to 300 bombs, some of them submarine mounted. So it was a deal, basically. Look, we know Israel has this stuff. We can't acknowledge it, and therefore we won't bother you about your keeping chemical weapons. So this is old news. The U.S. was a party to Iraq's crossing this red line. Obama does not demand that anyone else sign the CWC, this convention, and this just shows you the hypocrisy. Now, Obama says and Kerry say we need to send a message, but the world won't hear the message they think they're sending, because everybody knows, at least everybody but the American people, knows how hypocritical the U.S. stance is.
Yeah, and really, what do they hope to accomplish here? I mean, if it's a limited strike, which is what they're describing it as, it's going to be striking a segment of the military of Assad. You know, soldiers are going to die, but soldiers have families. Those families are going to be angry. Is the fact that they're killing a certain percentage, let's say 0.5% of Assad's soldiers, going to affect Assad? I mean, that's ridiculous. And then the best question I've heard is, what happens if he says, well, the heck with you people there in the United States, and he engages in either another chemical attack, or if he didn't do the first one, goes and does a chemical attack. Then what does Obama do? Does he say, well, okay, now we got to go in there and really teach him a lesson this time? I mean, what really do they hope to accomplish? And my feeling is what they really want to accomplish, that they're going to be targeting things with the design of helping the rebels. That they've understood that the rebels have suffered some catastrophic defeats on the battlefield, and that was not what they had hoped. They figured that the rebels would ultimately win without U.S. intervention or direct intervention. I think the CIA's been intervening for a long time. But I think that's what this is really all about, is what can we target that will help the rebels? And that's why I keep saying, why don't they just be honest and say this is about regime change?
Well, Kerry said at a press conference in London early this morning, our time, or last night, that the action, the response in Syria will be, there's a quote, unbelievably small and limited. So it drives you to the position that it's purely symbolic, except for the fact that, like you said, it will kill people. It'll kill innocent people. It will kill draftees, but it probably will kill civilians as well. And it, like you say, it's not going to be limited. They always go in thinking, every war begins with, the boys will be home by Christmas, right? And then it goes on for four or 5 years or whatever. That's what they said about World War I. They always do that. So they pretend, it's like a chess game. They act like there's nobody on the other side of the board. They're just going to make their move, and that's the end of it. We could go home. But they're forgetting, like you say, people respond, and nobody knows what Assad will do, and nobody knows that if this shifts the balance to the rebels, as the language in the Senate resolution says, that this will mean that Al Qaeda types, the al-Nusra Front, will get its hands on weapons, which is what happened in Libya. And possibly the chemical weapons, and no one knows what happens from there. So it's just ridiculous to think this. Now, they keep talking about, but there have been successes in the past. Like Kosovo has been a great success. Well, Kosovo, they bombed Kosovo, NATO bombed Kosovo, led by the U.S. under Clinton, for over 70 days. They killed 500 civilians, most of whom were in Kosovo. It accelerated Milosevic's ethnic cleansing, pro-Serb, anti-Kosovar ethnic cleansing. And when the bombing finally stopped, when Milosevic gave in, the Kosovars proceeded to ethnically cleanse the Serbs in Kosovo, Gypsies, and there are still foreign troops in Kosovo. Now, they're not U.S. troops, so they don't count. But what are they? They're either European Union or NATO troops in Kosovo to this day. That was 1999. That's the success. That's one of the great successes they point to say, hey, this could be nice, clean, and short. It's a joke.
Well, and they're also trotting out this old World War II canard that they use. It really may be a sign of desperation on the part of the interventionists. But Bret Stephens, the conservative columnist for the Wall Street Journal, he's got a piece about the Robert Taft isolationists, and so he's hearkening back to playing the Hitler card in World War II and appeasement in Munich and all that stuff. And then on the left, you've got Bill Keller at the New York Times. He's got a piece last couple of days on called Our New Isolationism. And I really think we ought to bring this up to a deeper, more philosophical level, because this is really the debate we ought to be having. I mean, I'm grateful to these guys that they're getting desperate enough to say, oh, we got to go after Saddam because look what we did in World War II and so forth. Because I think this gives us an opportunity, Sheldon, to raise people's vision to a higher level here. That it's not just about should we intervene in Syria or not, or Iraq, or Afghanistan, or Yemen, or Pakistan. I mean, this thing can go on and on and on. That really what we need to be debating in this country is what these guys are saying we need to be debating. This concept of interventionism, that an empire that is the national security state that has existed mostly since World War II, but even before that, versus this concept of libertarianism, which is really the founding principles of America. that America doesn't go abroad in search of all these monsters to destroy. There's always monsters all over the world because it changes our country into a dictatorial country, into a mean-spirited country. And this notion of, oh, we're just trying to help the Syrians is nonsense. I mean, if you asked any of these interventionists, well, how about just opening up our borders and letting Syrian refugees come over here? You know, those millions of Syrians that are flooding into Egypt and surrounding countries. Oh, the interventionists would say, oh, no, we can't let Syrians come into America. I mean, we'll go bomb them because we love them, but we're not going to let them live in our country. And remember that it was the same argument that Roosevelt made about the Jews. When Hitler offered to let the Jews leave Germany in the 30s, Hitler says, we've got immigration quotas, we can't let them out. And of course, Keller and Stevens are pulling the World War II card, but they never point out that at the end of World War II, Eastern Europe, East Germany, the Poles had been freed from Nazi tyranny, but then suffered 50 more years of communist tyranny. Now, interventionists consider that a victory, but darn sure the Eastern Europeans and the East Germans don't consider it a victory. I mean, what a horrible thing to die for, so that the communists could control Eastern Europe instead of the Nazis.
Well, I think it does show their desperation. Curry started this by bringing up Munich and Hitler, and when all else fails, invoke Hitler. I think that's Godwin's law. It also apparently is supposed to mean you've lost the debate, so I hope that's true. But it just shows you the bankruptcy of this. I mean, how many Hitlers have there been in the last 20, 30 years? I mean, there was Saddam Hussein, there was Gaddafi. There was Milosevic. Now there's Assad. It gets a little old. It looks like the American people aren't buying it because at least 70% now in polls say don't do this. And this brings us back to what's going to happen in Congress. It's funny, during the gun control debate just recently, when they wanted to do the expanded background checks, and the people that were for it were pointing to the polls saying, hey, 90% of the people want this bill. How dare members of Congress vote against it when the people want it? Well, doesn't that argument cut both ways? A huge majority does not want to bomb Syria, get involved in any further. In fact, we should be getting out. We're already deeply involved. That's kind of one of the overlooked things. We're already deeply involved. But they don't want to bomb Syria. It's showing up in the polls, and yet these sober establishment types who come on with their somber tones of voice say what do the American people know about this? This is time for leadership. Ignore the American people. It's just, there's no principle here. It's whatever's convenient. So look what's going on in Congress. I mean, who wants it? Who's lobbying for this? The biggest lobbyist is AIPAC, Israel's American main lobbying organization. They have swarms of volunteers trying to get the members of Congress who are against this to come around. And like we said at the beginning of the show, Obama is working very hard behind the scenes, and who knows what kind of promises they're making, but also just on this personal basis. Hey, I need this. I'm in trouble. You can't damage the presidency or me this way. And this is the kind of thing. This is the kind of thing we're going to war on. It reminds me of, the great Marx Brothers movie, Duck Soup, where the two countries go to war because, one made one leader made, slight insult to another leader, and they have to go to war because their honor's at stake. This is what this is all about.
Well, and I wouldn't be surprised also if some of these defense contractors were doing some lobbying themselves in favor of all this. I mean, remember these Tomahawk missiles, I think they cost $1 million each. I mean, you fire, 20 of those, and all of a sudden, hey, man, new contracts have to be signed for manufacturing replacement missiles. But, Sheldon, here you have a classic case where people could take individual responsibility for their beliefs. You've got a civil war in this country. You've got a rebel faction that is trying to oust the regime. So all these interventionists here in the United States, all they would have to do to take individual responsibility is travel to Syria, join up with a Syrian rebel unit, and fight for their cause. Not, as far as I know, not one single interventionist has done that. Keller certainly hasn't done it. Stevens hasn't done it. I don't know if any member of Congress has done it. But there is the opportunity. The force has already been built. They've got a strong rebel force. Travel over there. Get yourself a weapon. It's not that hard to get a weapon. and go in there and volunteer. Take individual responsibility for your actions. Americans did that during the Spanish Civil War. They did it when they joined up with English forces before Pearl Harbor to fight the Germans. So why can't these people just go over there and join up the rebel side instead of saying, we want to delegate this to the U.S. government, to the U.S. troops. We want them to do it. I mean, to me, that's just your classic abrogation of individual responsibility. Maybe a little bit of cowardice thrown in, too.
Well, one of the difficulties is there's not one rebel side. There are many, many rebels sides, many rebel factions. It's very complicated.
Even better for them. That's even better. They got choices.
Yeah. Well, and they don't know. They wouldn't know who. You know, they say, "Oh, we can vet. We know who is responsible," but that's nonsense. And even if they think they know who's responsible, just the fact that they send the weapons to that group doesn't mean that's where the weapons will stay. We've seen this in other places. So there's a lot of arrogance there. There's a lot of claiming of knowledge that they can't possibly have. You're right. They have no intention of putting their own lives, much less money, on the line. But at least they're not calling for putting ground forces in. But of course that could change depending on what moves are made. They say it now. But the main reason they say it now is because they know darn well the American people would never stand for that. So they have to say that. That's the function of this phrase, which I'm totally sick of, boots on the ground. No boots on the ground. This is supposed to be the magic phrase that says, hey, this is clean, antiseptic. It's not going to be very expensive. It's nothing much is going to happen except we're going to get the result we want. That's all that's supposed to do. It's supposed to make your eyes glaze over and say, okay, I guess I don't need to worry about it. There aren't going to be boots on the ground. I mean, this is really something very vicious about this, the way they keep throwing that phrase around as if to say, this is perfectly safe. But we know that's not the end of it, and we know they said no. If you read the resolution, no combat, no troops for the purpose of combat. That is a loophole that you can drive many, many Humvees across through.
Well, it's also fascinating, Sheldon, that this whole national security state apparatus, this vast military empire that President Obama has at his disposal. I mean, let's face it, it's his private army. They will do whatever he tells them to do. They will faithfully obey orders. They've convinced themselves that that's equivalent to supporting and defending the Constitution. Notice how they can embroil the entire nation into this crisis environment. As I've pointed out in the past, the Swiss are not having to go through this. They're not over there angsting and debating and trying to figure out which targets to bomb in which countries. Their country is oriented only to defense. And I think that's what we need to keep reminding the American people, that all of this is totally unnecessary, that this whole apparatus, the national security state apparatus, this military empire that is at the disposal of the president, that's the crux of the problem. Because let's face it, if he didn't have this huge military force here at his disposal, he couldn't be doing any of this stuff. He could be threatening as much as he wants, but he couldn't carry out the threat. And so I think that's what we need to keep focused on also, is the role of this vast military empire and the national security state in keeping Americans all embroiled and angsting and so forth.
Yeah. Well, the military doesn't seem too excited about this. In the Senate hearing before the Foreign Relations Committee with Kerry and Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Dempsey sitting there, Kerry was trying to explain how this wouldn't be war. Launching missiles is not war. And he turned to Dempsey, General Dempsey, and said, "You want to say any more about that?" And Dempsey said, "No, I don't." And it was quite clear that he wasn't signing, he was not going to make a fool of himself. He's a general after all, and say, no, this would not be war. And it was a couple times in that hearing that Dempsey was, Kerry tried to lateral the ball to him, and Dempsey said, I don't want it, in effect. I don't think the military wants it. And there was an interesting story in the Washington Post last week from a former Iraq soldier who's talked to a lot of people in the brass of the military who think this is totally absurd, totally ridiculous. Now, you're right. If they're ordered to do it, they will do it. But their feet are dragging, it looks like. That's at least some good news.
Well, after they've been, assigned to Iraq and Afghanistan for 5, 6, 7 tours, facing death at every turn, why would they be enthusiastic about this? I mean, you would think that they might once a couple of years to be back with their families, watch their children be raised, help raise their children, instead of this constant turnover of, you come home and sit for a couple of months and then you get assigned to Afghanistan or Iraq and maybe even Syria now. Yeah, you would think the average soldier's getting sick and tired of this, and that sick and tiredness is going to be transmitted up the ranks to the commanding generals. They're going to know how important morale is. But, we've got to maintain Obama's credibility. He drew the line in the sand. And, boy, if we don't help him maintain his credibility, that means our credibility is at stake because we're all just like a beehive here, I mean, it's all just so friggin' ludicrous in terms of this whole, trying to maintain credibility of the president and the whole national security state, and they won't take us seriously if we don't go bomb them, and other countries will think we're now pushovers, the strongest military in the world, and somebody's going to think that, they're pushovers if Obama doesn't get to invade or attack Syria. Absolutely ludicrous.
Well, people ought to take a look at what's happening in Iraq, where there's bombings going on all over the place, in Afghanistan, where NATO just killed 9 or 10 civilians. They don't show us those pictures. They show us pictures of people allegedly and children allegedly killed by an Assad chemical weapons strike, which may or may not be the case. There's plenty of evidence against it, but they never will show us the pictures of NATO killing children with bombs. Pictures of kids blown up by bombs are just as ugly as pictures of people, dead from chemical weapons.
Oh, yeah, but that might cause people to start questioning, so the mainstream press isn't going to do that. That's only the perspective that you find here at the Libertarian Angle. Hope you enjoyed the show. Our time's up. If you're not subscribing to our FFF Daily, it's one of the finest daily email publications you'll ever find. It's like a Libertarian editorial page every day in your email box. And our monthly journal that Sheldon edits is called Future of Freedom. That's $25 a year. Love to have you support us. We're trying to move America in a better direction here. And that's through the power of ideas and through perspectives like this that you've heard today. So that's the show. Look forward to seeing you next time.